Okay, let's unpack this. We've got these sources you sent over, all detailing the very beginning of Daniel, chapter 1. It's really setting the stage for this incredible story of survival.
Yeah, and the mission you've laid out is crucial. It's not just what happened historically during the Babylonian exile.
Mhm.
We need to dig into how these four young men survived this intense cultural pressure cooker.
Right, this deliberate campaign of assimilation. And more than that, why their story still resonates.
Mhm.
How it provides, like, a blueprint for holding on to your convictions today.
Exactly. It's about navigating a world trying to reshape you. Think about it, a calculated program designed to completely erase their cultural and religious identity. And somehow these teenagers basically they found a way through the most challenging political and spiritual landscape imaginable.
Without losing who they fundamentally were.
Precisely. And that's why it's so relevant, isn't it? Whether you're feeling pressure at work, ethical corners being cut, or maybe ideological clashes at university, or just navigating shifting social values, this ancient story has something very direct to say.
And it starts right with the name, doesn't it? The sources really hammer this home. Daniel. Daniel in Hebrew.
Absolutely foundational. Daniel, it means God is my judge. And that single phrase, it's basically the theme music for the entire book.
God is my judge.
Think about it. It's this quiet declaration of sovereignty. Here's Daniel, eventually standing before the most powerful men on earth, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, kings and emperors.
Yeah.
But his name is this constant underlying reminder. You might be judging me now, but you're not the final authority. The ultimate judgment, the one that truly matters, belongs to God. That principle, divine sovereignty, that's the anchor we need to keep coming back to.
Okay, so that clarifies our task for you, the listener.
Yeah.
We need to get past the sort of surface level Daniel refused the king's food story.
Yeah, it's much deeper than just dietary choices.
We need to grasp the gravity of what he was choosing. It wasn't just preference. It was a profound statement of loyalty. It set a precedent for everything else. So what was really at stake? And how do those same principles apply to the choices you have to make today about truth, about compromise, about how you use your influence?
It's about figuring out how their faith became their strength, not a liability in that hostile environment.
All right, let's set the scene then. Daniel 1, verses 1 and 2. It kicks off with what looks like a total disaster for God's people. Judah falls.
Yeah, the story opens specifically in the third year of King Jehoiakim of Judah. That puts us around 605 BCE. And Jehoiakim, well, he's a tragic figure. His father, Josiah, was this righteous king trying to reform Judah.
But Jehoiakim went the other way.
Completely. The sources paint him as a wicked ruler. He was actually put on the throne by the Egyptians, so he's basically a puppet king, known for corruption, ignoring prophetic warnings. Jeremiah famously condemned him. He even, burned Jeremiah's scroll. Judah, at this point, was really asking for the judgment the prophets had warned about for so long.
And that judgment showed up looking like Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. The timing here is key, isn't it? The sources highlight the Battle of Carchemish happening right around then.
Oh, absolutely critical. 605 BCE, Carchemish, Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar, absolutely crushes the Egyptian army. Egypt was the regional superpower Judah had been leaning on. Suddenly, they're gone from the picture.
And Babylon is the new force.
Yeah.
Right on their doorstep.
Exactly. Now, this first siege of Jerusalem, the one described here, it wasn't the final catastrophic destruction that came later. This was more strategic. Nebuchadnezzar wanted political submission. He wanted compliance, and crucially, he wanted hostages.
Elite hostages.
Yeah.
The best and brightest. Like Daniel and his friends.
Precisely. Take the future leaders, bring them to Babylon, re-educate them, assimilate them. It ensures loyalty down the line and integrates the conquered territory into the empire.
But here's where we need to pause and really look at the theological layer. Because on the surface, it just looks like, well, Babylon had the bigger army. They won. End of story.
Right. My mix right.
But the text throws in this really disruptive phrase. Verse 2 says, the Lord delivered Jehoiakim into his hand, or gave him over.
That phrase changes everything. It's arguably the most important theological statement in these opening verses. Imagine you're a Jew reading this, maybe already in exile. Your first thought might be, our God failed. The Babylonian gods are stronger.
Or just that human power overwhelmed divine protection.
Exactly. But the text cuts that off right at the knees. It says, God did this. Scholars like Gleason Archer, John Goldingay, they really emphasize this point. God wasn't defeated. He was actively, sovereignly using Babylon.
Using this pagan conquering empire.
Yes, as his instrument, his tool for judgment and discipline. Why? Because Judah had been rebelling against him for generations, ignoring the prophets, breaking the covenant.
Wow, okay, so that's a really profound concept. God is orchestrating events, even through actions and empires we'd see as unjust or, frankly, evil.
That's the core of divine sovereignty, isn't it?
Yeah.
It operates above and through human systems. God wasn't caught off guard. He wasn't weak. The message to the exiles was devastatingly clear. This isn't happening despite God. It's happening because of God's judgment on our sin.
It shifts the blame, or rather the ultimate cause, from Nebuchadnezzar back to Judah's own choices.
It does. It maintains God's power and righteousness, even in the face of apparent defeat. He wasn't unable to protect his temple. He chose to allow his king and even the sacred temple vessels to be taken.
And speaking of those vessels, the place Nebuchadnezzar takes him is also loaded with meaning. The land of Shinar. Why specify Shinar?
Ah, Shinar. For any reader familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, that name instantly triggers alarms. Shinar is the ancient region where Babel was located.
The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11.
Exactly, the historical and symbolic ground zero for human pride, for collective rebellion against God, for trying to build a civilization entirely independent of him, making a name for themselves, literally.
So Nebuchadnezzar taking the temple items there. He thinks he's showing off, right? Proving his gods are superior by placing Judah's sacred objects in his god's treasury in the heartland of his empire.
That's his intent, certainly, a display of dominance. But for the reader who understands the symbolism, it's God allowing his holy things to go right into the historical epicenter of human rebellion. It's not defeat, it's setting the stage.
Setting the stage for what?
For his servants, Daniel and his friends, to be witnesses in that very place. It's like God is saying, you think this is the heart of your power? I'm sending my representatives right into the middle of it. Deep cover agents for the kingdom of God, planted in the symbolic capital of human defiance.
Okay, so the political and theological stage is set. Now, the strategy. Babylon's plan for these elite hostages. The sources describe this as a really methodical, multi-pronged assimilation project, not just random captivity.
No, nothing random about it. John Walton's work, among others, confirms this was a standard imperial playbook used by empires back then. The goal was total cultural re-engineering.
To turn potential threats, young foreign nobles, into loyal Babylonian civil servants.
Exactly. Eradicate any lingering national or spiritual identity that could fuel rebellion and replace it entirely with Babylonian culture, loyalty, worldview, the whole package. It's systematic indoctrination aimed at the future leadership class.
And phase one was selection. They were picky. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just want any hostages. He wanted the cream of the crop.
The criteria listed in Daniel 1 are incredibly specific. Young men, likely teenagers, maybe around 14 or 15, from noble or royal families.
And the list of qualifications is intense.
Right. No physical defect, handsome, so they look the part in the royal court. But then, proficient in all wisdom, knowledgeable, astute in learning, and competent to serve in the king's palace.
So physically impressive, intellectually brilliant, quick learners, and already showing potential for government service. They wanted the whole package.
They were scouting for talent. Young men who could absorb the training and become effective, loyal administrators within the Babylonian system.
Which brings us to the training itself. 3 years. Intensive education in Chaldean language and literature. This wasn't just vocational training, was it?
Not at all. This was ideological immersion. Learning the language, yes, but Chaldean literature was steeped in Babylonian mythology, religion, astrology, divination, their entire worldview.
So mastering the curriculum meant internalizing the belief system.
That was the goal, to strip away their Hebrew monotheistic foundation and replace it with a functioning Babylonian mindset. This education was mandatory. It was the engine of their transformation, designed to align them ideologically with the empire.
Okay, so they're working on their minds. Then phase 2 goes straight for the heart, for their identity, changing their names and controlling their diet. Let's talk about the names first. That feels like the ultimate attack on who they are.
It's incredibly significant. In Hebrew culture, a name wasn't just a tag. It often reflected character, destiny, or relationship with God. It meant something deeply personal and theological.
We already talked about Daniel, God is my judge. What about the others?
Hananiah means, the Lord has shown favor. Mishael asks the rhetorical question, who is like God? And Azariah means, the Lord has helped. Every single name is a declaration of faith and dependence on Yahweh.
Powerful names. And the Babylonians replaced them with names linked to their own gods.
Exactly. Daniel becomes Belteshazzar. The meaning's debated, but scholars often link it to Bel or Marduk, the chief Babylonian deity, perhaps meaning Bel protect his life, Or maybe you're relating to Nebo, the god of wisdom. Either way, it's pagan.
Shifting his declared allegiance.
Totally. Hananiah becomes Shadrach, uncertain meaning, maybe linked to Marduk or Aku, the moon god. Mishael becomes Meshach again, uncertain, possibly a deliberate twisting related to who is like Aku. Azariah becomes Abednego, meaning servant of Nebo or Nabu.
So every new name is essentially forcing them to carry a banner for a Babylonian god, a public ritual stripping away of their heritage.
Yes. By forcing them to answer to these names daily, the Babylonians were trying to overwrite their core identity, their spiritual allegiance, externally at least.
Okay, but hold on. This raises a really interesting point that the sources wrestle with. If the names were dedications to pagan gods, why did Daniel and his friends apparently accept the name changes? They drew the line hard at the food, but not the names. Doesn't that seem like a compromise right there? Accepting a pagan name.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer reveals Daniel's incredible strategic wisdom, his discernment. He seems to have differentiated between what was imposed on him externally and what required his active participation internally.
How so?
He couldn't control what the Babylonians called him. The name Belteshazzar was an official designation, an administrative label given by the conquering power. He likely saw it as submitting to the governing authority in matters that didn't require him to violate God's law directly. It's an external adaptation.
Like respecting the powers that be, as Paul later talks about in Romans 13.
Kind of, yeah. He could function under that name without necessarily internalizing his pagan meaning or letting it define his true allegiance to God. He knew who he was, regardless of the label.
But the food, that was different. The king's rich food and wine served daily for 3 years. That required active participation.
Exactly. That's where he drew the line, because consuming that food, according to Daniel 1.8, would defile him. And scholars like D.A. Carson, Joyce Baldwin, they point to a couple of major reasons why. The first one is huge: idolatry.
You mean the food itself might have been offered to idols?
Almost certainly. It was standard practice in pagan cultures. Food served in the royal court, especially the choicest portions, would likely have been dedicated to Babylonian gods as part of a ritual offering before being distributed.
So eating it wouldn't just be nourishment.
It would be an act of communion, participation in idol worship, a tacit acknowledgement, even acceptance, of the idol's power or blessing. That's a direct violation of the First Commandments. A massive compromise.
Okay, that's clear. What's the second issue?
Jewish dietary laws.
That's right.
Kashrut. Even if, hypothetically, the food wasn't explicitly offered to idols, it almost certainly wouldn't have met kosher standards.
Right. It could have included meat from unclean animals forbidden by Leviticus, like pork.
Or even if it was meat from technically clean animals, like beef or lamb, it wouldn't have been slaughtered correctly, according to Jewish law, specifically the draining of the blood. Consuming blood was strictly forbidden.
So either way, idolatry or breaking kosher laws, eating the king's assigned diet, meant spiritual defilement.
Yes. It meant adopting the religious and cultural practices tied to that food. The name was imposed. The food had to be willingly consumed. That's the distinction. Daniel resolved internally not to cross that line.
Which brings us right to that moment of decision. Daniel 1.8, but Daniel resolved. He made a conscious choice. He balanced adaptation with non-compromise.
It's such a precise application of faith. He understood he needed to function within the Babylonian system. Learn the language, learn the literature, accept the external protocols where possible.
Engage with the king's education, so to speak.
Right. But the moment the requirement shifted from cultural adaptation to active participation in something spiritually compromising idolatry, defilement, that's where he drew the boundary. He knew exactly where fidelity to God required him to say no.
And the way he said no is also remarkable. He didn't, stage a rebellion or start shouting slogans.
No, that likely would have been fatal. Instead, he approaches the official in charge, the chief eunuch, whose name might have been Ashpenaz, and he does it with wisdom and respect.
But the sources emphasize that God had already given Daniel favor with this official. That's verse 9.
Crucial point. God was already smoothing the path. But even with that divine favor, the chief eunuch's reaction shows just how dangerous Daniel's request was. The fear was real.
What was the eunuch actually afraid of, losing his job? Or worse?
Much worse. He lays it out for Daniel in verse 10, essentially. Look, the king personally assigned your food and drink. If I let you eat something else and you end up looking pale or thinner than the other guys your age, the king will notice.
And Nebuchadnezzar wasn't known for his patience or forgiveness.
Not at all. The eunuch says, "You would endanger my head with the king." He literally feared being executed if Daniel and his friends appeared malnourished because he'd bent the rules. This wasn't just bureaucratic inconvenience, it was a life and death risk for the official.
Okay, so Daniel's putting this guy in a terrible position,
Yeah.
but he doesn't back down. Instead of demanding, he proposes something different.
Yeah, and this is where the wisdom really shines. He doesn't make demands, he proposes an experiment, a test. It's brilliant, actually. He goes to the steward or guard whom the chief eunuch had appointed over them.
And suggests a trial period.
Exactly. A low-risk, verifiable 10-day trial. The proposal in verses 12 and 13 is simple. For 10 days, just give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. The word used is often translated pulses, basically. Plant-based foods like grains, vegetables, seeds, legumes. Simple, clean food.
And the measure of success.
Purely visual and comparative. Then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the king's food and deal with your servants according to what you see.
So, let the results speak for themselves. If we look worse, okay, we'll do it your way. But give us 10 days to show you.
It was genius. It put the responsibility on the outcome, not the official's decision alone. It minimized the official's immediate risk. And it was a profound act of faith by Daniel and his friends, trusting that God would sustain them, make them visibly healthier on this simple diet compared to the royal luxuries.
Placing the burden of proof on God's provision.
Precisely. Providing tangible, empirical evidence of God's blessing on their faithfulness.
And a result, verse 15, after 10 days.
Complete vindication. The text says they appeared better in appearance and fatter in flesh, healthier, more robust than all the young men who were eating the king's rich food. Not just equal, but visibly superior.
Wow. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving on God's provision.
The implication is huge. God physically blessed their obedience. It demonstrated that fidelity to him brings greater flourishing than conformity to the world's standards, even its richest offerings. And crucially, it convinced the official.
Right. Verse 16 says, the steward then took away their royal food and wine permanently and gave them the vegetables and water they'd requested.
That 10-day test, that act of courage grounded in faith, changed their reality for the next 3 years. It proves that standing firm on what seems like a small issue, a daily choice about food, can have massive consequences and pave the way for greater influence and integrity later on.
That faithfulness really did set the foundation for everything that followed. They completed the 3 years of intense Babylonian education, absorbing all that knowledge. But the sources are very careful about where their real competence came from.
Yeah, Daniel 1.1 scene is key. It acknowledges they learned the literature and wisdom of the Chaldeans. But then it adds explicitly that God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom.
So the secular education provided the material, but God provided the insight.
The discernment, the understanding, the ability to synthesize it and use it wisely, ethically. God elevated the raw data into true wisdom. Their education was the vehicle. God was the engine and the guide.
And Daniel got something extra, didn't he? A specific gift tailored for that culture.
Yes. Verse 17 also says Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. In Babylon, a culture obsessed with omens, astrology, and dream interpretation to guide state policy, that gift was pure gold.
It instantly made him incredibly valuable, even by their standards.
Absolutely. John Walton makes this point. It shows that true insight, the kind that can actually navigate reality, originates with God, and it surpasses even the most sophisticated pagan or secular systems of knowledge designed to replace him. God equipped his servant to outperform the native experts on their own turf.
Which leads us to the final exam. After the 3 years, King Nebuchadnezzar himself gets involved. He personally interviews the graduates.
Yeah, the culmination of the program. The king wants to see the results of his investment. He brings them all in, talks with them, tests them. Verse 19 says he found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
They stood out from the entire cohort.
Head and shoulders above. They had absorbed the king's education, but they hadn't been consumed by it. They had integrated it with a higher wisdom.
And the king tested them specifically on matters of wisdom and understanding. This wasn't just about reciting facts.
No, this was about judgment, insight, problem solving, the very qualities needed to advise the king. And the comparison Nebuchadnezzar made is legendary.
The 10x factor.
Verse 20. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom.
10 times better than his own professional wise men, his spiritual advisors, the Chaldean experts.
It's staggering that 10 times better isn't just hyperbole. It's a theological statement about the qualitative superiority of God's wisdom operating through faithful individuals compared to the world's wisdom even at its peak. The very system designed to assimilate them ended up highlighting their God-given distinctiveness and superiority.
And this wasn't just a flash in the pan. This level of wisdom and integrity gave Daniel incredible staying power. His influence lasted for decades across empires.
That's the final note in chapter 1, verse 21. Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. That means his career spanned the entire Babylonian exile, from Nebuchadnezzar's early reign around 605 BCE through the fall of Babylon right up to the beginning of the Persian Empire under Cyrus around 538 BCE.
Wow. Decades of service under multiple kings and two different world empires, Babylon and Persia.
It's a powerful testament. It shows that God's protection and purpose endure. When you build your life on fidelity and God-given wisdom, your influence can transcend shifting political landscapes, regime changes, even the rise and fall of empires. Character endures.
Okay, so let's bring this home. We've journeyed through the setup, the assimilation strategy, the test, the vindication, the reward. What does this ancient blueprint mean for you, the listener, today? The core idea seems to be this connection between faithfulness in the small things and gaining larger influence.
Right. That principle, like Jesus said later, faithfulness in little leads to faithfulness in much. We see it playing out again and again in history. People who, like Daniel, face their own version of the king's diet, their own pressures to conform or compromise, and chose conviction instead.
Let's explore some parallels.
Well,
Principle 1, standing for justice, even when it's costly. The sources suggest looking at someone like William Wilberforce,
Wilberforce is a perfect example. British parliamentarian, late 18th, early 19th century. His life's mission became abolishing the slave trade throughout the British Empire.
which was, that was the ultimate king's diet of his time, wasn't it? Economically and politically.
Hugely. The British economy was deeply entangled with the slave trade. Powerful vested interests, enormous profits. To stand against it was politically dangerous, socially isolating, and financially disadvantageous.
He must have faced immense pressure to just, go along with it, accept the status quo.
Right.
It was the foundation of so much wealth and power.
Absolutely overwhelming pressure. Decades of it. Ridicule, political opposition, social ostracization. But like Daniel standing firm in Nebuchadnezzar's court, a system built on conquest and forced labor. Wilberforce stood firm in the heart of British power. He refused to compromise his moral conviction, grounded in his Christian faith.
And eventually.
Eventually, after over 20 years of relentless effort, he succeeded. The Slave Trade Act passed. It was a monumental victory for justice, stemming directly from his refusal to consume the diet of complicity offered by his culture. His faithfulness in the face of that hostile system changed the world.
Okay, principle 2, cultural adaptation without compromise. This is Daniel learning Chaldean but refusing the food. The parallel here is Hudson Taylor.
Hudson Taylor, yeah.
Right.
Mid-19th century, founder of the China Inland Mission. His approach was revolutionary for the time. He realized that to effectively reach people in inland China, missionaries couldn't remain culturally aloof.
They couldn't just stay in their Western compounds, speaking only English, wearing Western clothes.
Exactly. Taylor saw that as creating unnecessary barriers. So, controversially, he adopted Chinese dress. He learned the language fluently. He adopted Chinese customs where they didn't conflict with his faith. He tried to live among the people.
Which got him criticized, even by other missionaries, right? They saw it as compromising, maybe even going native.
Yes, he faced significant pushback. Some felt he was lowering standards or blurring lines, but Taylor understood Daniel's principle. You adapt culturally. Learn the language, understand the customs, like Daniel learning Chaldean literature, in order to communicate effectively, but you never compromise the core message or foundational beliefs, like Daniel refusing the defiling food.
Distinguishing method from message.
Precisely. Remove the cultural static so the spiritual signal can be heard clearly. It's about being wise and adaptable without losing your anchor.
Principle 3, the power of small choices. Faithfulness in the little things. Mother Teresa comes to mind here.
Her work is a profound example. Focusing on the poorest of the poor, the dying, in Calcutta, her approach was often criticized for not being systemic enough. Why not tackle the root causes of poverty? Why focus on individual acts of care when the need was so vast?
People wanted large-scale solutions, political change.
Right. But Mother Teresa consistently framed her calling differently. It wasn't necessarily to change the whole world, but to be faithful to the person God placed in front of her right now, to offer love and dignity in that specific, immediate encounter.
Seeing the value in this seemingly small act.
Exactly. And that connects directly to Daniel. Refusing a plate of food seems small compared to navigating imperial politics. But that single act of faithfulness, repeated daily, built the spiritual muscle, the habit of integrity, that prepared him for the much bigger tests later, the fiery furnace, the lion's den.
If you can't be faithful in the small daily choices.
You won't have the foundation, the character to stand when the truly seismic pressures come. Integrity is built brick by brick, choice by choice.
And the last principle, number 4, navigating authority and truth. Martin Luther is the suggested parallel.
Luther's clash with the dominant religious authority of his day is a classic example. His whole stance was based on prioritizing biblical truth by faith alone, scripture alone, over institutional decrees or traditions when they conflicted,
His famous, "Here I stand, I can do no other" moment.
which echoes that core conviction. We must obey God rather than men, as Peter said in Acts. This connects directly back to Daniel's discernment.
Absolutely.
Daniel showed respect for the Babylonian authorities. He submitted to their legitimate requirements, the education, the name as an external label. He wasn't needlessly rebellious, but when the authority commanded something that directly violated God's revealed law, consuming defiling food, he knew his ultimate allegiance lay elsewhere.
There's a higher authority to obey.
Yes, and that's the critical application for us today. We're called to respect governing authorities, institutions, employers. But if the state or the company culture or the social norm demands that we violate clear, core ethical or spiritual principles, if we're asked to consume our era's version of the king's diet, then our ultimate loyalty has to be to God's truth. Luther's stand was possible because, like Daniel, his allegiance was settled before the crisis hit.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful, really digging deep into just the first chapter of Daniel. Let's try to synthesize the main takeaways for you, the listener. 3 key revelations seem to stand out.
First, the big picture. God is sovereign over history. That's the message embedded in Daniel's name. God is my judge. Nations rise, empires fall, political winds shift, but God's ultimate purpose prevails. Even apparent defeats, like Judah's exile, are part of his plan, often as judgment or discipline. He's always in control.
Second, the source of real power. It's not just worldly knowledge or skill, it's wisdom grounded in character and faithfulness to God. Daniel and his friends got the best secular education, but it was God's wisdom that made them 10 times better. Spiritual integrity amplifies competence. True influence comes from combining skill with unwavering conviction.
And third, the personal challenge. Loyalty demands discernment and resolve, especially when facing assimilation pressure. We have to actively identify our king's food, those subtle compromises, ethical gray areas, toxic cultural norms, or ideological pressures that would defile our conscience or compromise our core beliefs. We need to refuse that food, even while we intelligently engage with the king's education, learning, working, and contributing effectively in the world.
That leads to a really provocative final thought. Daniel, a teenager in a foreign land, was willing to risk his career, his well-being, maybe even his life, and definitely his supervisor's life, over what was on his dinner plate.
Seems disproportionate on the surface, doesn't it?
Yeah, so think about today. The pressures are maybe more subtle, but just as real. The pressure for economic security might tempt us toward ethically questionable business practices. The desire for political influence might demand compromising alliances. The need for social acceptance might push us to dilute our convictions or stay silent about injustice. What is the modern equivalent of the king's diet that you are being asked, maybe even subtly pressured, to consume?
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What cultural demand, what small ethical compromise, what pressure to conform are you facing right now? Daniel's story is a powerful reminder, especially today when information and influence seem like the ultimate currencies. It reminds us that knowledge and skill are only truly valuable, only truly wise, when they're guided by unwavering character and deep-seated integrity. Are you prepared to potentially risk your comfort, your status, your reputation, to stay true to your core convictions? That's the challenge Daniel leaves us with.